Welcome to Front Office Pros. It is day 4 of free agency. We've been talking about free agency the past few days. If you've been enjoying these videos, we encourage you to like this video so that others can also see this content. We will also be talking about players that are still available and who are the best available and why are they still out there.
Hike!
So let's first talk about the players that have signed today. As of last night, offensive tackle Orlando Brown Jr. signed with the Cincinnati Bengals for 4 years, $64 million, with $31 million guaranteed. It was the largest signing bonus ever given to an offensive tackle. Quarterback Gardner Minshew signed with the Indianapolis Colts for 1 year, $5.5 million, with $3.5 million guaranteed. Wide receiver Darius Slayton re-signed with the New York Giants at 2 years, $16.5 million. And wide receiver Parris Campbell signed with the Giants as well for 1 year, for a total max of $6.7 million with $2.9 million guaranteed. And then cornerback Darius Slay, there was talk about him moving on, but he actually came back to the Philadelphia Eagles and a contract extension of 3 years, $42 million with $23 million guaranteed. We also saw D'Onta Foreman sign. He signed with the Chicago Bears. He signed on a 1-year deal for $3 million. Joe, and we also saw Harrison Smith have a restructure. I want to say it was roughly around $8 million to stay with the team. So, Joe, with all of those players, what jumps out to you?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that jumped out to me was, like you said, last night, the Bengals getting offensive line help for protecting Joe Burrow and getting Orlando Brown. I mean, he was the top offensive lineman on the market for a long time, and he's finally found a new home with the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, he is a talented player. Was formerly a right tackle, was able to play left tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs and really did well in that role. I don't know what this means for La'el Collins. I think he could be on the outs, but I think Brown is an upgrade for them, and they're continuing to emphasize that offensive line to help them. As for Minshew, he knows Steichen's system. He was in Philadelphia, so it makes a ton of sense. Could totally see him starting to begin the year as they ease in whatever rookie quarterback they end up drafting. And then, the Parris Campbell signing is very interesting. He has never been able to stay healthy, but when he has been healthy, he's been pretty good. That wide receiver room really hasn't had any big names signed there. They're really keeping the same group of guys outside, adding Parris Campbell, and obviously they have Darren Waller at tight end. So it'll be very interesting to see. He has an opportunity to become like a number one receiver. I don't think he's that caliber of player. But I guess it's just a couple of guys they're having. No like the guy in that receiver.
Yeah, I don't understand what the Giants are doing, man. I mean, they're practically rolling out the same wide receiver group as they had last year, and like expecting different results. I mean, you pay Daniel Jones the money, you tag Barkley. I understand you got Waller, but come on, let's get some better weapons. Like you said, that once again they're signing guys that are perennially injured and often not on the field. Like they just made the mistake of giving Galladay the money a few years ago in free agency, and he never paid dividends. So they still got to do something there. Maybe they'll get something done in the draft. But like you said too, Minshew is definitely interesting with the Colts. He's definitely a serviceable backup in the NFL here.
And how about those Eagles? Now they re-signed Slay. We're able to keep Bradbury and Fletcher Cox. I wasn't expecting to bring all some of those guys back. They did lose some guys, but that was good for them to bring Slay back.
Yeah, I mean the question is still going to be here that there's some other pieces in the secondary they're losing, and see what they're going to do to fix them. I mean, Gardner-Johnson's probably going to be gone. You lose Marcus Epps, but having those two corners back is absolutely huge. And like you said, with Fletcher Cox holding it down the D line. We should see more of Davis along the interior with Hargrave gone as well.
Real quick about D'Onta Foreman. It was a low money deal, only 1 year, $3 million. He had a pretty good season with Carolina. For those out there, dynasty managers who love Khalil Herbert, Are you concerned by this signing for Foreman, or is it indicating that he may be just a training camp body and he may not even make the roster? They may draft somebody. What do you think about that?
I think he'll make. I definitely don't think he's a training camp body, even though like it's just a 1 year, $3 million deal. Still don't know how much is guaranteed on that, but he showed that he's a serviceable back with given the opportunities, and he's still that differentiated running style with Khalil Herbert. So I think it's more so they could be like a 1-2 punch, and he could get short yardage and goal line opportunities.
So that actually covers most of the guys that signed in day 4. It's been sort of a quiet day, but we thought that we'd go over some of the players that are still out there because there are some big names. So starting with the offensive side of the ball, quarterback Lamar Jackson, he was franchise tagged. A team would have to sign him to an offer sheet, and if the Baltimore Ravens don't match, then they would have to give up 2 first-round picks. So because he didn't have an agent, he only could start talking to teams after 4 p.m. on Wednesday. So he really couldn't be a part of the whole tampering period process. Running back Leonard Fournette, he was released by the Buccaneers. He's available as a free agent. Ezekiel Elliott was released by the Cowboys just a few days ago, or yesterday even, I think. So he's available. Running back Damien Harris from the New England Patriots, he is still waiting to find a home. And running back Kareem Hunt is also out there. Wide receiver Odell Beckham, we've been hearing some chatter that he could sign. There were reports that he was wanting $20 million a year, and that's probably why he hasn't signed yet. But you've been hearing the Cowboys. You've been hearing, heard the Ravens possibly as an option. Wide receiver Adam Thielen, he was released by the Minnesota Vikings for cost savings, and he's visiting the Carolina Panthers, as well as wide receiver DJ Chark. I heard that he's also taking a visit to the Carolina Panthers. It is kind of visit season now that these players can take those visits. They're not going to sign, because the tampering period's gone. Now they're going to take visits and then sign. And then 2 tight ends, 2 of the biggest names in the tight end market still have not went yet. Tight end Dalton Schultz from the Dallas Cowboys, who was formerly franchise tagged, now is able to hit the market. There have been rumblings that the Chargers were interested, but they're not willing to pay the money because they have Gerald Everett. And then tight end Mike Gesicki, we really haven't heard anything about. The only thing we've maybe seen on Twitter is that he started following some New England Patriots on Instagram. But other than that, we know nothing about what's going on with Mike Gesicki. So definitely some big names here, Joe. What are your thoughts when you see this group of guys?
Yeah, it's a lot of aging running backs still out there. What's most surprising to me is the fact that Dalton Schultz and Gesicki are still on the market. I understand that everyone's anticipating, the tight end draft class this year is amazing, and they're thinking that teams are holding out. But these guys are proven in the NFL. They've been playmakers for their teams. I'm just surprised that, like you mentioned earlier, Tunyon got signed by the Bears before these guys. Just kind of crazy to me that nobody's going after them, and especially, I been monitoring Gesicki's situation, traded for him in our Dynasty League, and man, am I have my fingers crossed. You mentioned the Patriots. I hope he doesn't go there.
That would be a disaster place for him to go.
I agree. That's the way I feel. As soon as you mentioned the Patriots, I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, that would be really bad news. I'm with you. It is supposed to be one of the deepest tight end classes we've seen, I've heard Daniel Jeremiah say, in decades. So that could be a factor as to why these guys haven't signed yet. But I agree. I would have thought that they would have been signed by now. They're talented players, and you would have thought that they would have found a home by now. I actually also wonder about Odell. I'm really curious to see where he's going to go. I think he's probably the biggest impact player possibly in this group here, not counting Lamar, because I think, although I would find it very interesting for Lamar to go somewhere else, I think the writing's on the wall that he's going back to Baltimore. We've seen so many backup quarterbacks just fly off the shelf. I think that's the one position that's completely picked clean. There's nobody left outside maybe Arizona. I'm still wondering what's going on with them because Kyler Murray could miss most of the year or at least some of the year. So I think, to me, though, he's probably the biggest impact player. I'm really curious to see where he ends up signing and for how much money.
Yeah. Do you think Odell's going to wait till training camp or a little bit later so that he doesn't have to go through as much training camp? be one of those kind of late summer signings that we typically see with some of these veteran guys.
It's possible. I mean, it's true. I mean, you will see guys get signed, even sometimes in like June and July, and you're wondering like, man, free agency was so long ago. I can't believe they haven't signed yet. Maybe that is him. I don't know. I'll tell you what, if DJ Chark does sign with the Panthers, really like that location for him. They have a void at receiver now that DJ Moore is in Chicago. I think he might have an opportunity to be the number one receiver there. Obviously, he did really well his 1 year with Gardner Minshew. Other than that, he really hasn't done much. But I think he's a talented player. Just really has had injury issues and really hasn't had a solid quarterback throwing him the ball.
Yeah. I mean, I think Goff throwing him the ball last year was probably the best, but then he was just kind of crowded on that team at the wide receiver position. Obviously, Detroit's go-to guy was Amon-Ra St. Brown, but yeah, I agree with you. The Panthers would be an interesting location for him, and it'd be interesting to see how he does, like potentially being the number one guy again as he was in Jacksonville.
I just can't believe that some of these running backs are still there. I know they're older, but when you're seeing guys like Justice Hill and Jeff Wilson and Chase Edmonds and James Robinson and Rashad Penny signing before these guys, to me, it's kind of a head scratcher to me. I think Leonard Fournette has more in the tank than Zeke. I've always had an affinity for Leonard Fournette. I wouldn't mind him coming to the Bills, honestly. But I don't know. I'm just a little surprised that these guys are not signed and those other guys I mentioned have been signed. Do you think Hunt, Elliott, or Fournette will find a team, or do you think they could possibly be done?
No, I think they'll find a team. I mean, it's funny you mentioned. I just saw a thing. They're starting to link the Bills with Elliott. I know you mentioned Fournette and the Bills, but I
didn't see that.
Yeah, I saw a thing earlier today where they were saying Elliott, possible suitors for Elliott, and the Bills were like at the top there. So it'll be interesting to see. I just think you mentioned those other guys. I think those guys are easier to sign because you can get them for a lot less money. I think these guys are still kind of have a decently high asking price. Maybe until we get closer to the season, they might just lower it so that they can play.
Real quick, before we transition over to the defensive side of the ball, do you think Lamar Jackson ends up playing with the Baltimore Ravens, or do you think it's possible for some team to try to sign him?
At this point, I think he's going to be back in Baltimore. I mean, like you mentioned, I feel like a lot of these teams that felt like should have been in the running have kind of already signed some backup quarterback potentially, and I like the Falcons seemed like to be one of the perfect spots for Lamar Jackson, but then they pulled themselves out of the running like very quickly after they got tagged, and then they signed a veteran quarterback themselves to in Heineke to and we'll see if he's the guy or they go with Ritter. So I think at this point I don't know what other team would go after Lamar and be willing to give up the picks. So I see him back in Baltimore at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe the only way it may happen, and it's going to be like very, very unlikely, is if the Packers and the Jets, if those talks go south, for whatever reason, they can't come to an agreement. And it just, because there have been, it wouldn't be crazy. There have been reports that, Rodgers is okay going there and everything else. And then there's just talks break down. They're not able to figure it out. And then the Jets are just left being like, what do we do? That to me would be the probably only situation, because they are probably one of the most desperate teams out there. And if they weren't able to somehow get Rodgers when he's on the goal line, maybe out of desperation, they make that move.
Yeah, I could see that. I think you're right. I think that they, if something happens on their and that end, that might be the only way that Lamar's not a Raven this upcoming season.
So transitioning over to the defensive side of the ball, some more older players, but definitely have been impact players over these past few seasons. Defensive end Yannick Ngakoue, former Colt, is on the market. Defensive end Jadeveon Clowney seems like he's always a free agent, but he was released by the Cleveland Browns just recently. Defensive end Leonard Floyd, he's an outside linebacker, but he's basically an edge rusher. He was released by the LA Rams. Defensive end Frank Clark for the Kansas City Chiefs. He was released by the Kansas City Chiefs, so he's out there. Linebacker Bobby Wagner, he was released by the LA Rams. We haven't heard much from him. Linebacker Myles Jack was just released today. They had signed Cole Holcomb as well as a Landon Roberts from the Miami Dolphins. So Myles Jack is now no longer a Pittsburgh Steeler, and they let Devin Bush walk, so they have a new linebacker core. Linebacker Rashaan Evans, who had a career year, had over 150 tackles with the Atlanta Falcons. He is looking for a job. Safety CJ Gardner-Johnson, we've seen on Twitter mention how disrespected he feels based on we don't know what the deals are, but he feels disrespected apparently. He's still looking for a job. Safety John Johnson was released by the Cleveland Browns, and he's a free agent. And safety Julian Love, who had a career year, he's not a household name, but a really good season for the New York Giants, and he is still out there. So, Joe, what sticks out in your mind with this group?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of interesting names out there, like you mentioned. I mean, you kind of got the older pass rushers still out there with a guy like Clowney. Like you said, he kind of jumps from team to team. You know, I always felt like the Browns were honestly the best spot for him. I mean, having Myles Garrett and him both coming off the edge, they're both similar in size and just power guys. You know, Clowney's productive when healthy, so we'll see where he ends up. But like you said, that I mean, the surprise has got to be the top safety on the board still, and that's Gardner-Johnson. You know, fingers crossed, Denver is not done, and we can find a way to get this guy in orange and blue. But yeah, and then you mentioned Julian Love and Myles Jack, and they got visits with the Seattle Seahawks, so we'll see what happens.
You mean, I know Julian Love's visiting the Seahawks, and then wasn't it Devin Bush, not Myles Jack, who was visiting the Seahawks?
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Yeah,
you got confused with Steelers linebackers. I don't blame you.
did.
But for me, it's Bobby Wagner. I mean, Bobby Wagner had an unbelievable year last year. Really didn't miss a beat. I would have thought he would have signed by now, but he is his own. He doesn't have an agent. He's his own agent, and I do think. You know, unfortunately for these guys, I think they are able to sign contracts on their own. But I do think it's the type of business that the NFL, they run a certain way, and they run better when they have agents. It's just, I feel like that's just the way it is. And when you don't have an agent, they have a more difficult time. You know, if nothing else, just to give them a harder time, just because they're not following the rules of the system. So I am very curious to see where Wagner goes. We've talked about him maybe. Reports have been saying maybe he'd go back to Seattle, but there really haven't been a lot of links. I would love to see him go to Buffalo. Obviously, he had some links to Denver last year, obviously with his ties with Russell Wilson back in Seattle. So I'll be very curious. I think he is probably the biggest impact player of the group. I know he's getting older, but he has just been the professional, you know, for the past, years. You know, I mean, he's just been like an unreal talent. I think he still has that ability. And then, these pass rushers, this is still a good group of guys. These guys still can perform. I'll be curious to see if they end up getting signed, or are these guys going to have to wait till June or July or after the draft before they sign? Because, right now they're not getting any action. I'm really surprised by it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, some of these guys, especially like a Clowney or Yannick Ngakoue, these pass rushers, I think it will be a little later on, maybe not all the way to training camp, but possibly, after the draft, see how these teams fill out the rosters with the draft and what kind of cap money they still have, and then they might go after these guys. But as you mentioned, Bobby Wagner is interesting. I believe he still is playing at a high level and can still make an impact on a team. It'll be interesting to see where he lands, if it's on either one of our teams, whether it's the Bills or Broncos or somewhere else. But I think he took his time last offseason as well, last year, before signing with the Rams. So he might just take his time and really wait for the right situation for him.
Yeah, and going back to what you were talking about with CJ Gardner-Johnson, I'm really surprised that he is still not signed. He had a career year last year, only 25 years old. He's just a really dynamic player. And then John Johnson, I talked about this, I think it was yesterday when we were talking about the Juan Thornhill deal. I think John Johnson's a better player than Juan Thornhill. And now John Johnson, he's 27. I think he's a really good player too. I'll tell you what, for my own Dynasty IDP league, I got Gardner Johnson and John Johnson. So I am waiting on pins and needles to see what's going to happen over here. So that was day 4. Not a lot of signings that's taking place today. But we were here. We wanted to show up. We want to talk about the guys that did sign and some of the notable players who are still out there. Hopefully we'll get some more signings either tonight or tomorrow. We'll be able to talk about them. There's definitely some high-profile names, but they could wait. They could wait till after the draft, or we could see them signing here in the next few days. So hopefully they do that. But we want to say thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please, as we said earlier, like this video. Go ahead and subscribe to our channel. And I didn't mention it, but in the comments, what deal have you liked the best so far in free agency? We would ask you about day 4, but there really hasn't been anything with day 4, so we might as well just say what's your favorite signing that's happened so far. But thank you so much for watching, and until next time.